The morning after the battle with the Zorth warship brought an unexpected silence to the ancient space station. Maya walked through the corridors with Storm and Ember trailing behind her, their massive bodies moving silently despite their size. The station's lights flickered in a rhythm that had become familiar to her over the centuries she had lived here alone. Now everything felt different. Humans were here. Change was coming. Helena Morrison sat in the main control room studying the data from last night's encounter. She had not slept. Her eyes were tired, but they held a fierce intensity that reminded Maya of the warrior spirit she had glimpsed in many human cultures throughout history. The commander looked up as Maya entered, and for a moment, her gaze settled on the dragons with a mixture of wonder and caution. The Zorth ship sent a distress beacon before it retreated, Helena said without preamble. We intercepted their message. They are reporting our location to their command station in the Outer Rim. We have perhaps 18 hours before a larger force arrives. Maya's heart sank. She had known this would be the consequence of using the station's weapons, but knowing and experiencing were two different things. The ancient systems that her ancestors had built were powerful, but they were not unlimited. Using them had drawn attention, and now that attention would bring danger. How many ships? Maya asked quietly. At least 3, possibly 5. Helena leaned back in her chair. But that is not the worst part. The United Earth Council has received intelligence suggesting that the Zorth are not acting alone. There is another faction, a human faction that has been working with them. Humans who want to capture your dragons and sell them to the highest bidder. The words hit Maya like a physical blow. She had known that humans could be capable of great cruelty. She had seen it recorded in the ancient archives that covered thousands of years of human history. But to think that humans would betray their own species, that they would cooperate with alien invaders for profit, seemed almost unforgivable. We need to leave, Maya said suddenly. If we go now, if we take the dragons and disappear into deep space, the Zorth will have nothing to hunt. Your people will be safe. Helena stood up and walked closer to Maya. The elf woman remained still, watching the human commander with ancient eyes that had witnessed empires rise and fall across the galaxy. That is not an option, Helena said firmly. Running does not solve anything. The Zorth have learned that dragons exist. They will search for you across every corner of the galaxy, and the traitors within humanity, they will do the same. Eventually, they will find you. But more importantly, they will find others like you, other civilizations, other dragons that we do not even know about yet. Maya realized what Helena was suggesting. The only real solution was to face the threat directly. They could not run from this problem. They could only stand and fight. My government is sending reinforcements, Helena continued. 3 military cruisers will arrive within 16 hours. They are equipped with the latest defensive shields and weapons systems. But we will need the dragons to be ready. We will need them to work with our forces, not against us. This is what I feared most, Maya said softly. The dragons were never meant to be weapons. They are beings of consciousness and power, not tools to be used in wars. But they might choose to fight anyway. Helena responded, not because we force them, but because they will understand what is at stake. The Zorth do not conquer to bring peace or freedom. They conquer to bring suffering. If the dragons are as intelligent as I believe they are, they will comprehend that. Maya walked over to Storm and placed her forehead against the dragon's head. Images and feelings flowed between them through their connection. She shared with him the danger, the threat, the coming violence. She also shared something else. She shared Helena's words, Helena's conviction that this fight was necessary. Storm's response came back to her not in words but in sensations. She felt his determination, his willingness to face whatever came. She felt his concern for her, for Ember, for the ancient station that had been their home for so long. And she felt something else. She felt his hope that perhaps Maya had finally found others who could understand what they were. The next 12 hours passed in a blur of preparation. Helena and her team worked with Maya to chart out defensive strategies. The station's ancient weapon systems were complex and unpredictable, but with the dragons' help, they managed to increase their power output by nearly 40%. The 3 human cruisers began arriving through a secret jump point that the station's systems maintained, hidden from external sensors. Commander James Porter arrived with the first cruiser, a woman in her late 40s with silver streaking through her dark hair. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who had seen many battles and survived them all. Unlike Helena, Porter seemed immediately skeptical about working with the dragons. We have protocols against alien integration into human military operations, Porter said during a strategy meeting. We do not have combat procedures that account for their behavior. They might decide to change sides mid-battle, or they might freeze when they see real combat stress. The dragons have been fighting longer than your species has had written language, Maya said coldly. They understand strategy, tactics, and discipline better than most of your commanders. If anything, you should be concerned about whether your soldiers can match their level of combat awareness. Porter studied Maya for a long moment, then nodded slightly. Fair enough. We will adapt to them. They will not need to adapt to us. The battle came faster than anyone expected. The Zorth warships emerged from their jump point exactly 14 hours after Helena had received the distress signal. But they were not alone. 3 massive cargo vessels accompanied the military ships, and inside those cargo vessels, Helena's team detected the presence of human weapon systems and technology. The human traders have arrived too, Helena said grimly as she watched the tactical display showing the approaching enemies. This is not just about the dragons anymore. This is about preventing a war between humanity and the Zorth collective. Maya stood with her dragons on the observation deck, watching the approaching vessels. She had lived for so many centuries that she had seen countless species rise and fall, countless wars begin and end. But this felt different. This felt like a moment that would reshape the future of multiple civilizations. Storm and Ember seemed to sense the gravity of the situation. Their scales began to glow with an inner light that grew brighter as the enemy vessels approached. It was not an aggressive display, but rather a preparation. They were readying themselves for what was to come. Helena appeared beside Maya, her uniform crisp and her bearing military straight. She did not speak at first. Instead, she simply watched the dragons with an expression that mixed fear with profound respect. Whatever happens in the next hour, Helena said finally, I want you to know that I believe we made the right choice, bringing you into our circle, asking for your help. I believe history will vindicate this decision. Maya turned to look at the human commander. She had lived long enough to know that history often did not vindicate anything. History was written by the survivors, and there was no guarantee that either of them would survive the coming conflict. But she appreciated Helena's words anyway. They carried a weight and sincerity that transcended the barriers between their species. The first shots came without warning. The Zorth weapons were brutal and direct, blue plasma bolts that streaked across space toward the station. But the human cruisers were there to intercept them, their shields flaring bright against the incoming fire. The war had begun. Maya reached out and touched both dragons simultaneously. She sent them a single clear message. Go, protect our home. The dragons launched themselves from the station with a speed that would have been impossible for any biological creature. Their massive wings folded tight against their bodies and they became living projectiles, rocketing toward the enemy fleet. What they did next would be remembered in the histories of 3 different civilizations for centuries to come. Storm and Ember moved through the Zorth formation with a grace and precision that left observers stunned. They did not attack randomly. Instead, they targeted the cargo vessels carrying human weapons, using their energy beams to slice through armor and disable systems with surgical accuracy. The human soldiers on the station watched in awe as the dragons worked in perfect coordination with the human cruisers. When a Zorth fighter launched toward one of the human ships, a dragon would intercept it. When a Zorth warship tried to flank the station's defenses, the dragons would appear and drive them back. But there was also a cost. One of the Zorth vessels managed to fire a massive energy torpedo that struck Ember directly. The impact threw the smaller dragon across space, and Maya gasped as she felt the connection between them shudder with pain. Ember, Maya whispered, her hands pressed against the observation window. Helena was already moving, issuing orders to the medical teams to prepare for receiving the wounded dragon, but Maya knew that nothing human medicine could do would help if Ember's injuries were too severe. The dragons were not just biological creatures. They were beings of energy and matter combined in ways that defied conventional understanding. The battle raged for 40 more minutes. It seemed to last forever and no time at all. The victory celebrations that followed were brief and muted. Yes, the station had been defended. Yes, the immediate threat had been eliminated. But everyone understood that this was only the beginning of a larger conflict. The Zorth Collective did not forget failures, and they certainly did not forgive defeats. Somewhere in the Outer Rim, commanders were already plotting revenge, already gathering forces for a return engagement that would be far more devastating than the first. Maya spent most of the first day after the battle in the medical bay with Ember, monitoring the small dragon's recovery. The dragon's wounds were healing at a remarkable pace now that Storm had transferred some of his vital energy to her, but the process had weakened Storm considerably. The larger dragon rested in a separate chamber. His scales dimmed, his movements slow and careful. Helena found Maya sitting alone in the observation room that overlooked the medical bays. The commander carried data tablets and an expression of grim determination that seemed to have become permanent on her face. "We have identified the human traitors," Helena said without preamble. "They are part of an organization called the Stellar Syndicate. They have been operating in the shadows for decades, selling advanced weapons technology to alien species in exchange for credits and political power. The Zorth have been one of their primary clients for the past 5 years." Maya looked at the faces displayed on the tablets. There were at least 30 people involved in the conspiracy. They ranged from low-level soldiers to officers who had held positions of significant authority in the human military. "What will you do with them?" Maya asked. "Execute them," Helena said flatly. "They are guilty of treason against the entire human species. Their actions have led to the deaths of thousands of soldiers and the destruction of multiple human colonies. There is no punishment severe enough for what they have done, but execution is what our laws demand." Maya understood the logic of this, though the concept of execution still seemed barbaric to her. But she also understood that humans were relatively young as a species, and their sense of justice still contained that primal need for retribution that older civilizations had mostly evolved beyond. "There is something else," Helena continued. "The United Earth Council has called for an emergency summit. They want to meet with you. They want to discuss the possibility of a formal alliance between humanity and your kind. They want to know if there are other dragons out there. They want to understand what your civilization is capable of." "I am what remains of my civilization," Maya said quietly. "My people were many once. We spanned multiple star systems and lived peacefully for thousands of years. Then the Zorth came. They wanted our knowledge, our technology, and our dragons. We refused. They responded with genocide. I am one of the last survivors. Storm and Ember are the last of the dragons that I know of." Helena absorbed this information with visible pain crossing her face. "I am sorry for what happened to your people. Your kind is not responsible for what the Zorth did," Maya replied. "But your kind must now decide what kind of species you want to become. Will you become another conquering force like the Zorth, or will you become something better?" The summit was scheduled for 2 weeks in the future, which gave Maya time to prepare and to think about what she wanted to say to humanity's leaders. She spent those 2 weeks working closely with Helena and the medical teams on the station. She taught them as much as she could about elf physiology, about the ancient technology that powered the station, and about the history of the broader galactic community that most humans knew almost nothing about. Storm recovered faster than anyone expected. By day 5, the dragon was strong enough to leave the medical bay. By day 10, he was back to his full strength, though there was something changed about him. His eyes held a new depth of sorrow, as though he had experienced something during the transfer of energy to Ember that had altered his fundamental understanding of existence. Maya knew that feeling. It was the burden of sacrifice, of knowing that survival sometimes required giving up parts of yourself that could never be recovered. Ember's recovery was less dramatic, but more complete. By the time the second week began, the smaller dragon was moving around the station with her characteristic grace, though she seemed to favor her left side slightly. She too had been changed by the experience, but where Storm carried sorrow, Ember seemed to carry a fierce determination. She had faced death and chosen to fight back. She had learned that she was more powerful than she had realized, and that knowledge had transformed her into something harder, sharper, more ready for what might come next. Patricia the doctor became something of a bridge between human and dragon during those 2 weeks. She spent countless hours studying the dragon's biology, taking samples of their blood and tissue for analysis. What she discovered was fascinating and terrifying in equal measure. The dragon's blood contained cells that could accelerate healing in other organisms. Their scales contained metals that did not exist naturally in nature, suggesting that their biology had been artificially enhanced or engineered at some point in their distant past. When Maya questioned Patricia about these discoveries, the doctor became thoughtful and hesitant. "It is possible that your species were not naturally evolved," Patricia said carefully. "Our preliminary analysis suggests that the dragons might have been genetically designed and enhanced by a third party, a race that was more advanced than even the elves. The implications of this revelation sent shockwaves through Maya's carefully constructed understanding of her own history. Had her ancestors known that the dragons were artificially created beings? Had they accepted the dragons as gifts from a more advanced civilization? These were questions that Maya suspected she might never be able to answer. The ancient archives stored in the station's deepest vaults contained information from her civilization's later years. But much of the very oldest data had been lost or corrupted over the millennia. As the day of the summit approached, Maya found herself struggling with anxiety and doubt. What if the human leaders rejected her? What if they saw the dragons only as threats to be contained and controlled? What if they decided to take the dragons by force once they understood their potential? Helena seemed to sense these worries. She sat with Maya on the observation deck one evening, watching the stars rotate past as the station slowly turned in its ancient orbit around a dead star. "My government has voted unanimously to propose a formal alliance," Helena said. The vote was not even close. What they saw in you, what they saw in your dragons, it changed something in the collective consciousness of our species. We are not a young people anymore, Maya. We are old enough to know that we cannot face the future alone. The summit was held on a neutral station in deep space, a facility that served as a diplomatic hub for 7 different spacefaring species. Maya had not been to such a place in 300 years, and she was struck by how much had changed and yet how much had remained fundamentally the same. Alien merchants hawked their wares in the trading sections. Diplomats in formal clothing hurried through corridors speaking in dozens of different languages. Security forces maintained tense order over crowds that represented radically different biology and culture. Maya herself was treated like a curiosity, a being of legend that had suddenly materialized into reality. She moved through the summit chambers with Storm and Ember at her sides, and people parted before her, some in reverence, some in fear, all of them staring with eyes that struggled to comprehend what they were witnessing. The summit hall itself was enormous, a spherical chamber with representatives from every major human government arranged in seating that represented both power and careful diplomatic balance. At the center stood Maya, alone except for her dragons, facing the combined leadership of an entire species. The chief human representative, a woman named Claire Vasquez from the United Earth Council, stood and extended her hand in the human gesture of peace. "Welcome," she said formally. "The human race acknowledges you and your dragons as sentient beings deserving of respect, rights, and protection under the Interspecies Treaty framework. We propose a lasting alliance between our peoples, with the goal of maintaining peace and stability across the regions of space that we both inhabit." Maya stepped forward and took Claire's hand. The gesture was strange and formal, but it carried meaning that transcended the simple physical contact. It was a promise. It was a commitment. It was the moment when 2 species chose to stand together against a hostile universe. The alliance was established through a series of formal agreements that took 3 full days to negotiate. The terms were clear and fair. Humans would provide technological support and military assistance to help the dragons maintain their ancient station and defend their territory. The dragons would share knowledge about advanced technology and their understanding of broader galactic politics. More importantly, they would work together to oppose the expansion of the Zorth Collective and to protect other species from conquest and enslavement. But beneath the formal language of treaties and agreements, something more important was happening. Humans and elves were learning to understand each other. They were learning to see each other not as alien curiosities, but as partners with shared interests and mutual respect. 6 months after the alliance was formed, the ancient space station had been transformed into something neither purely elf nor purely human, but something entirely new. The transformation was not just physical, though that was evident in the new laboratories and training facilities that had been constructed in the lower sections. The deeper change was cultural and spiritual. Humans and elves were learning to work together, to trust each other, to build something greater than the sum of their separate parts. Maya had taken a position as the director of interspecies relations for the combined human and elf forces. It was a role that required her to navigate complex political situations, to mediate conflicts between different departments and different species, and to help both humans and elves understand perspectives that were radically different from their own. The work was exhausting and often frustrating, but it was also profoundly meaningful. Helena had been promoted to admiral, and she now commanded a fleet of 30 warships, a force that had grown significantly as more human governments committed resources to the alliance. The ships were staffed with both human and elf crews, and while there were occasionally tensions between the different species, The overall trend was toward greater cooperation and mutual respect. But not everyone was happy with the alliance. There were humans who saw the elves as invaders, as a threat to human independence and autonomy. There were officers in the human military who resented taking orders from elves or working alongside elf soldiers. And there were elements within human governments that secretly remained in contact with the Zorth Collective, continuing the traitorous work of the Stellar Syndicate. It was this last threat that drew Maya away from her administrative duties and into the field once more. Intelligence reports suggested that a significant shipment of advanced human weapons technology was being prepared for sale to the Zorth. The transaction was supposed to take place on a station orbiting a moon called Kepler-7, a remote installation that had been abandoned by most civilian contractors. The mission was simple in theory, but complex in execution. A human and elf team would infiltrate the station, identify the weapons cache, and disable it before the Zorth could take possession. Maya volunteered to join the team personally, insisting that her presence as an elf representative was necessary to maintain the alliance's integrity on a covert operation. Helena protested strongly. "You are too valuable to risk on a Black Ops mission," the Admiral argued in Maya's private quarters. "If something goes wrong, if you are captured or killed, the entire alliance could collapse. The humans would blame the elves for failing to protect you. The elves would blame the humans for putting you in danger. We cannot afford that risk." "Then we send a team that cannot fail," Maya replied calmly. "We send experienced soldiers. We send combat engineers. We send intelligence specialists. And we send me and Storm to provide both the magical and diplomatic authority that this mission requires. If we are successful, we will show that human and elf forces can work together perfectly. If we fail, then the alliance was never truly solid anyway." Helena looked at Maya for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Very well. But I am assigning my best team to accompany you. Colonel Reeves will lead the ground operation, and Lieutenant Martinez will handle technical systems. And if anything goes wrong, if the Zorth arrive or if the team is discovered, you retreat immediately. Do you understand me?" Maya smiled gently. "I am 300 years old and I have survived multiple wars and the genocide of my entire civilization. I know how to retreat when necessary, Helena." The team that assembled for the operation was small but highly skilled. Colonel Reeves was a human woman in her early 50s with gray eyes that seemed to see through any deception or subterfuge. She had fought in 6 different wars across 3 continents before joining the Alliance forces, and her combat record was nearly perfect. Lieutenant Martinez was younger, in his early 30s, and he possessed an almost supernatural ability to understand and manipulate complex technology systems. Rounding out the team were 2 elf soldiers named Kira and Torin, both veterans of the ancient conflicts that had devastated the elf homeworld. They fought with a grace and efficiency that made even the experienced human soldiers seem clumsy by comparison. And finally, there was Storm, whose presence alone was enough to make even the most hardened soldiers feel small and slightly afraid. The mission began with a covert insertion at night, during the station's rotation period when surveillance systems were at their minimal activation level. The team used a shuttle that had been equipped with cloaking technology, allowing them to approach the station without triggering alarms. They landed in a maintenance bay that Martinez had identified as having minimal security presence. From the moment they entered the station, Maya could feel the wrongness of the place. The corridors were dimly lit, and the air had a recycled staleness that suggested the environmental systems had been running at minimal capacity for months. Bodies floated in one of the major corridors, the remains of workers who had clearly met violent ends. This was not merely a weapons transaction. This was something far darker and more sinister. "We have company," Martinez whispered into the communication system. "I am detecting 17 heat signatures distributed throughout the station. They are not arranged in a defensive pattern, which suggests they do not know we are here. But we have maybe 5 minutes before the automated systems complete their rotation and activate the main surveillance grid." Colonel Reeves made quick hand signals, and the team split into 3 groups. Kira and Torn would move to the main control room and attempt to shut down the surveillance systems. Martinez would proceed directly to the weapons storage location. Maya and Reeves would investigate the bodies and determine exactly what had happened on this station. The body they found in the first corridor was human, a man who had been burned so severely that identifying him was nearly impossible. Storm sniffed at the remains and let out a low growl that made the fur on Maya's neck stand on end. The dragon could sense something that the rest of the team could not. Some fundamental wrong in how this person had died. "That is not weapons fire," Storm said through their telepathic link. That is intentional torture. Someone wanted information from these people, and they were not gentle in obtaining it. Maya examined the second body and the third, finding similar patterns. These people had been tortured before being killed, which meant that the Zorth had already taken what they wanted from this station before the transaction was supposed to occur. We need to move faster, Maya reported to the team. The Zorth have already been here. This is a trap. As if in response to her warning, alarms erupted throughout the station. Red lights flashed, and the sound of security doors slamming shut echoed through the corridors. The team had been discovered, or the automated systems had completed their rotation after all. Get to the extraction point, Reeves ordered. We fall back and regroup. But before the team could move, the main corridor exploded with weapons fire from multiple directions. The Zorth had been waiting for them after all. A contingent of Zorth soldiers emerged from side passages, their weapons blazing with controlled precision. They had known exactly where the human and elf team would go, which meant someone had provided them with detailed intelligence about the infiltration. Storm roared, a sound that echoed through the station with such force that it cracked several of the overhead light panels. The dragon launched himself at the nearest group of Zorth soldiers, his wings extended and his energy weapons charging. The combat became a whirlwind of motion and violence. Maya found herself fighting beside Colonel Reeves, the human soldier's combat training proving nearly equal to Maya's own 300 years of battle experience. They moved as a perfectly synchronized team, covering each other's blind spots, pressing the Zorth forces back step by step, but there were too many Zorth. They kept coming, wave after wave of soldiers equipped with weapons that seemed specially designed to counter dragon physiology. One of these weapons struck Storm directly, and the dragon shrieked with pain as his wing was damaged by a blast of concentrated dark energy. Fall back, Maya commanded through the team link. We need to reach the extraction point. Storm is injured and we cannot hold this position. Kira and Torin emerged from a side corridor, blood on their clothing but moving with the speed and strength of warriors who had not yet exhausted their reserves. They provided covering fire for the retreat, forcing the Zorth soldiers to take positions behind cover rather than pressing their advantage. The extraction shuttle was waiting in the maintenance bay where they had landed. Martinez was already running the engines at full power, ready to launch the moment the team reached the vessel. Maya helped Storm into the shuttle, feeling the dragon's pain through their bond but knowing that they did not have time to deal with it now. They needed to escape first. They would heal later. As the shuttle cleared the station's airspace, Martinez activated the cloaking systems, rendering the vessel invisible to external sensors. But even cloaked, they could see the damage behind them as the station's weapons systems activated and began firing at the empty space where they had been only seconds before. The investigation into the traitor within the Alliance command structure was conducted with absolute secrecy. Only Helena, Maya, and a small team of officers from both human and elf intelligence services were aware of the full scope of the inquiry. Everyone else, including the people being investigated, remained in the dark about how close they were to being exposed. Maya took the lead in the investigation, her 300 years of life experience giving her an advantage in understanding human behavior and psychology. She interviewed each senior officer personally, watching their faces, listening not just to their words but to the subtle inflections in their speech. She was looking for micro-expressions, for the tiny involuntary muscle movements that revealed what people were thinking even as they tried to maintain a calm exterior. Colonel Reeves was the first person Maya interviewed privately, in the secure intelligence room. The human soldier sat across from Maya with the same calm demeanor she had displayed during the failed infiltration mission, but Maya could see tension in the way Reeves held her shoulders, in the slight clenching of her jaw. "You are wondering if I am the traitor," Reeves said bluntly before Maya could even begin her questions. "I can see it in your eyes. You are thinking that I led my soldiers into a prepared ambush, that I might have been working with the Zorth all along." Maya did not deny it. "You were in charge of the mission. You had access to all the operational details. You made decisions about squad placement and extraction timing. And if I was working with the Zorth," Reeves replied, "I would have ensured that we did not escape the station. I would have sacrificed myself and my soldiers to make it appear that we were betrayed. I would have made the failure look dramatic enough to shift suspicion away from me. But that is not what happened. We survived. And more importantly, we learned that someone warned the Zorth about our arrival in advance." Reeves leaned forward slightly. The only way the Zorth could have known about that mission was if someone in the senior command structure told them. Someone with access to classified briefings. Someone with the trust of both human and elf leadership. Maya studied the colonel's face carefully. Reeves was either genuinely innocent and had thought through the logic of the situation carefully, or she was an extremely skilled liar and actor. Maya suspected it was the former, but she could not be certain. The second officer Maya interviewed was Captain Lucas Freeman, a human from one of the Western Earth nations. Freeman had worked in logistics for the Alliance forces and had access to information about troop movements, supply shipments, and strategic planning sessions. When asked about the failed infiltration, Freeman became evasive and uncomfortable in a way that immediately caught Maya's attention. "You seem nervous, Captain," Maya observed quietly. "I am not accustomed to being interrogated about my loyalty," Freeman responded, but his hands were trembling slightly as he spoke. Maya leaned back in her chair. "There is more to it than that. You are afraid of something specific. You are afraid that I will discover something you have been hiding." Freeman remained silent for a long moment, then appeared to reach some internal decision. "I have been in communication with members of the Stellar Syndicate who survived the initial roundup," he said quietly. "I did not provide them with mission intelligence, but I accepted payment from them to pass along general information about human military deployments. I was not working directly with the Zorth. I did not knowingly compromise the infiltration mission." Maya felt a flash of anger, but she controlled it carefully. "You accepted bribes from human traders. You provided them with classified information that could potentially have been passed to the Zorth Collective. Your actions could have resulted in the deaths of dozens of soldiers." Freeman looked up at Maya, and there was genuine remorse in his eyes. "I know, I was desperate for credits. My family is struggling. The Stellar Syndicate approached me with an offer that seemed harmless at the time. But after the infiltration failed, after I realized what my actions might have contributed to, I knew I had made a terrible mistake." Maya had Freeman arrested and placed in secure custody. He would be tried for treason, though his cooperation in revealing the ongoing operations of the Stellar Syndicate might reduce his sentence somewhat. But he was not the traitor responsible for compromising the infiltration mission. The investigation would need to go deeper. Over the next 2 weeks, as Storm recovered from his injuries in the medical bay, Maya conducted more interviews. She found evidence of minor violations, corruption involving supply contracts, and unauthorized communications with external parties, but nothing that clearly pointed to someone leaking detailed mission intelligence to the Zorth. It was Patricia, the human doctor, who provided the breakthrough. She had been analyzing energy signatures from the station where the infiltration mission had failed, comparing them to readings from previous Zorth military operations. She discovered something remarkable and deeply disturbing. The Zorth did not pre-position soldiers at the station in preparation for your arrival, Patricia explained during a late-night briefing in the medical bay. The energy signatures showed that the Zorth forces arrived at the station only 4 hours before your team landed, which means they did not have time to set up the ambush that you experienced. Maya felt her mind racing. If the Zorth did not pre-position themselves at the station, then either they had been monitoring the team in real time and sent forces to intercept them, or there was something else happening. Something that Maya had not yet considered. Patricia continued her analysis. "I also discovered something else. The Zorth weapons that struck Storm, the ones that caused his wing injury, they are a new design. We have not seen weapons of this configuration in any previous encounters with the Zorth Collective, which suggests that the Zorth are developing new technology very quickly, faster than would normally be possible." Maya understood what Patricia was implying. Technology transfer. Someone was providing the Zorth not just with information about human operations, but with actual technology and weapons designs, which meant the traitor was not just someone with access to classified briefings. The traitor was someone with access to human weapons research and development facilities. There were only 3 people with that level of access: General Victor Morgan, Admiral Helena Morrison, and Dr. James Wu, the director of the Alliance Research Division. Helena was beyond suspicion. She had been with Maya during the infiltration mission, risking herself alongside her soldiers. The thought that Helena could be the traitor was absurd, but Maya knew better than to dismiss any possibility, no matter how unlikely. General Morgan was a human military officer in his 60s who had been skeptical of the Elf Alliance from the beginning. He had argued repeatedly for maintaining human military superiority and keeping elf soldiers in secondary roles. But skepticism about the alliance was not the same as actively working for the Zorth. That left Dr. Wu, the research director. Maya arranged to meet with him privately, choosing a location far from the main alliance command structure. They met in a small observation room on one of the outer sections of the ancient space station, a place where they could talk without fear of interruption. Dr. Wu was a man in his 70s, with kind eyes and a gentle manner that had earned him the respect and affection of nearly everyone who worked under his direction. He did not seem like a traitor. He did not seem like someone capable of betraying his own species. But Maya had learned long ago that appearances were often deceiving. "You have been providing the Zorth with weapons technology," Maya said without preamble. "Energy weapon design, shield systems, propulsion configurations. You have been giving them everything they need to create military systems that rival or exceed human capability." Dr. Wu did not deny it. He simply looked out at the stars visible through the observation window and sighed deeply. "You are right. I have been working with the Zorth for 2 years, but you need to understand why before you judge me too harshly." "I am listening," Maya said quietly. Dr. Wu turned to face her. 15 years ago, the Zorth attacked one of my research facilities on a colony world called Kepler-3. My family was living there. My wife, my 2 children, they were all at the facility when the attack happened. The Zorth took them prisoner. For 7 years I did not know if they were alive or dead. Then the Zorth contacted me. They told me that if I provided them with certain technology, they would release my family. Maya felt her anger beginning to drain away, replaced by a complex mixture of sympathy and understanding. "I did not know. The records did not show. I kept it hidden," Wu continued. "I created false research results. I misdirected funding. I worked in such a way that no one would discover what I was doing. And in exchange, my family was released. They are living now on a neutral station, safe from both the Zorth and from any potential retaliation. But the technology you provided," Maya said, "it has been used to develop weapons that have killed human and elf soldiers. It has been used against the Alliance." 8 months after the exposure of the traitors within the Alliance command structure, the combined human and elf forces were stronger and more unified than ever before. The technology transfer to the Zorth had been completely halted, and Dr. Wu was providing detailed information about every system and weapon design he had given to the enemy. This information allowed the Alliance to develop countermeasures and to predict Zorth technological capabilities with remarkable accuracy. But the Zorth were not idle during this time. Intelligence reports indicated that they were gathering forces for a massive offensive operation. The scout report suggested that the Zorth intended to launch a coordinated assault against 3 major Alliance strongholds simultaneously, an attack designed to overwhelm the Alliance's defensive capabilities through sheer force of numbers and the element of surprise. Maya stood in the strategic planning chamber with Helena and the other senior commanders, studying the tactical display that showed the predicted movements of Zorth forces across the region of space they controlled. The situation looked dire. The Zorth would have numerical superiority in both ships and personnel. The only advantage the Alliance possessed was superior technology in the presence of the dragons. "We need to strike first," General Morgan suggested. "If we attack the Zorth base on Titan Station before they can launch their offensive, we can disrupt their planning and force them to respond to our attack instead of proceeding with their coordinated assault." "That is too aggressive," Admiral Helena countered. "Striking first will be seen as an unprovoked attack. It will undermine the diplomatic support we have been building among the neutral species in the region. We need to hold our position and demonstrate that we are defending ourselves, not acting as aggressors." Maya listened to the debate and understood the validity of both arguments. This was the nature of warfare at the strategic level. Sometimes the most effective action was also the action that carried the greatest political risk. Sometimes defense required sacrifice. "We do not need to choose between defense and counterattack," Maya said quietly. The discussion stopped and all eyes turned toward her. "We can position our forces in a way that appears defensive, but is actually structured to allow for rapid offensive action. We appear to be preparing to defend our strongholds, but we are actually preparing to strike at the Zorth command structure when they commit their forces to their offensive." Helena smiled slightly. "You want to give them the appearance of vulnerability while actually being positioned for maximum advantage. It is an elegant strategy, but it requires absolute precision in timing and execution. It also requires that we demonstrate complete confidence to our troops. Maya continued. If anyone believes this is merely a defensive posture, if any element of doubt appears in how we communicate our intent, the Zorth will sense it through their intelligence network. Everything about this operation must be designed to convince them that we are merely preparing to withstand their attack. The next weeks were dedicated to implementing Maya's strategy. Troop positions were adjusted subtly, making them appear defensive while actually creating strike formations. Supply lines were established in ways that looked like reinforcement for the 3 targeted strongholds, but actually positioned resources for rapid redeployment to an offensive staging area. Communication patterns were altered to suggest worry and concern about the coming Zorth attack. And throughout it all, Maya worked with Storm and Ember, preparing the dragons for the role they would play in the coming battle. The dragons trained with the human pilots who would fly in escort formation with them, learning to coordinate their movements and weapons fire with the precision of military jets. It was a strange dance combining the raw power and instinct of dragons with the technological sophistication of human aircraft. Storm had recovered fully from his wing injury, though he carried a slight scar on his left wing that would never fully fade. The scar seemed to only strengthen the dragon's resolve and intensity. He trained with a focus and dedication that inspired the human soldiers who worked with him, showing them that even supernatural creatures could suffer injury and loss, yet still rise to face new challenges. The night before the predicted Zorth attack, Maya could not sleep. She found herself walking the corridors of the ancient space station, watching the preparations that continued even as most of the base settled into a tense quiet. She found herself drawn to the archives chamber, the deepest level of the station where the oldest records of elf civilization were stored. She pulled up files that she had not accessed in decades, records from the height of elf civilization before the Zorth invasion. She watched holographic records of elf cities, vast structures that seemed to grow naturally from the worlds they inhabited, designed in harmony with the environment, rather than in dominance over it. She watched recordings of elf ceremonies and celebrations, of arts and music and scientific achievements that represented thousands of years of cultural development. Then she watched the records from the invasion itself, the destruction of the elf homeworld, the genocide of her people, the escape of the few survivors, including herself, fleeing into deep space while everything they had built was being systematically destroyed. A soft sound behind her indicated that she was no longer alone. Maya turned to find Helena standing in the archive chamber, having followed her down from the upper levels of the station. I needed to see them again, Maya said softly. My people, my civilization. I needed to remember what we were, before the Zorth destroyed everything. Helena walked over and stood beside Maya, watching the holographic images of elf cities and the recordings of destruction that came after. This is why we are going to win, Helena said quietly. Not because we have better weapons or more soldiers or more dragons. We are going to win because we are fighting to preserve something worth preserving. The Zorth conquer and destroy. We are fighting to build and to create. The morning of the Zorth attack came with a sudden surge of enemy activity. Across all 3 strongholds, Zorth warships and fighter squadrons began launching coordinated assaults. The defense systems of the 3 bases activated, and for several hours it appeared that the battle would be a straightforward confrontation between 2 military forces with roughly equal capability. But then the real battle began. Alliance. Forces that had been positioned in what appeared to be reinforcement deployments suddenly activated their weapon systems and began moving toward the Zorth command structure. 3 additional human cruiser squadrons emerged from hidden positions where they had been waiting in stealth. And at the center of the offensive thrust, Storm and Ember accelerated toward the enemy formation with velocities that pushed even their remarkable physiology to the limit. The Zorth commander must have realized at that moment that they had been outmaneuvered, that what they had thought was a desperate defense was actually a carefully planned offensive. But by that point it was too late. The Alliance strike forces had already penetrated deep into the Zorth fleet formation, sowing chaos and destruction as they advanced. The battle raged for 6 hours. It was intense and brutal, with ships exploding and weapons firing in constant succession. The dragons moved through the Zorth formation like living weapons, their energy beams cutting through ship hulls and their physical presence intimidating the enemy crews into making mistakes that proved fatal. Maya observed the battle from the strategic command center, watching as the situation shifted from desperate defense to overwhelming offense. The Zorth were being destroyed faster than they could retreat, their formations breaking apart as commanders lost contact with each other, and coordination collapsed. By the time the battle concluded, the Zorth had suffered losses that would require years to recover from. They had lost 6 major warships, dozens of fighter squadrons, and thousands of personnel. The Alliance forces suffered significant casualties as well, but their losses were far more sustainable and far more replaceable. The retreat of the Zorth fleet signaled the end of their offensive capability in this region of space for the foreseeable future. They would need years to rebuild their military strength, years during which the Alliance could consolidate its position and expand its influence. But more importantly, the battle demonstrated something fundamental to both human and elf societies. It showed that when the two species worked together, they were unstoppable. It showed that the Alliance was not a temporary arrangement born out of necessity, but a genuine partnership that could face any challenge and overcome it. In the weeks after the battle, Maya received requests from dozens of other species to join the Alliance. They had seen what humans and elves could accomplish together, and they wanted to be part of that force. Slowly and carefully, the Alliance began to expand, growing from a simple human and elf partnership into something larger and more complex. A coalition dedicated to maintaining peace and stability across an entire region of galactic space. Storm and Ember became heroes among both human and elf populations. Their images were broadcast across 1,000 worlds, inspiring people to believe in the possibility of cooperation and unity. Children grew up hearing stories of the dragons and their elf master, who had helped to forge a new era of peace.